Winterfell was colder than ever, and even though Arya, Sansa, and Bran were still just children, they had already seen too much. It was the day Jon Snow left for the Wall when something strange happened. Arya found an old book hidden in the library, far behind the dusty shelves. It wasn't a book about history or legends. It was about dreams, green dreams, as the old people in the north whispered. Bran was the first to read it. Something about the symbols inside pulled at him. He didn't understand most of it, but that night his dreams changed. He saw a three-eyed crow, not once, but again and again. In one dream, the crow spoke to him, saying, "You have the power to see the past, change the present, and shape the future." Arya was curious. She always hated the idea of being a proper lady. Fighting and adventure excited her. She started training in secret, not just with a wooden sword, but with real blades she stole from the armory. The book also talked about faces, how wearing them could make someone no one. The idea fascinated her, but scared Sansa. Sansa, at first, thought all of it was silly. She still dreamed of marrying a prince and living in a castle. But one night she saw a different kind of dream. In it she was queen, but the people hated her. Her crown was heavy, and her hands were covered in blood. When she told Arya and Bran, they laughed, but inside, Sansa started feeling different. She no longer believed the world was kind. Then came the news that King Robert was coming to Winterfell. Everything moved fast after that. Bran climbed the tower, just like he did before. But this time, before he could reach the top, he felt something a pull, like the crow from his dream was warning him. He stopped, and that saved his life. He didn't fall. He didn't break his back. He came down confused, but alive. That moment changed everything. Catelyn Stark never had to leave Winterfell to care for Bran, which meant she was still there when the assassin came in the night. Bran had woken up just before it happened. He screamed, and Arya, sleeping nearby, ran in with a knife. She stabbed the man before he could hurt Bran or their mother. No one knew who sent the killer, but Catelyn began to suspect things were far worse than they seemed. Meanwhile, Sansa started watching people. Not like a child dreaming of fairy tales, but like someone who knew lies were all around. She began noticing how Queen Cersei looked at her father, Ned Stark. There was always something behind her smile, something cold. One day, Sansa overheard a conversation between Cersei and Jaime. They talked about secrets, about what would happen if someone found out. It scared her. She told Arya and Bran. Bran, still unsure of his dreams, tried to focus on the feeling he had in the tower. Something inside him was changing. He started sleepwalking, talking in his sleep. Arya thought it was creepy, but she trusted her brother. They all agreed something was coming, something dark. They didn't know what it was, but they knew they had to stick together. The three of them, Arya, Sansa, and Bran, made a secret vow. No matter what happened, they would protect each other. They would not be the same helpless children others thought they were. They had seen their futures in broken pieces, and they were ready to change them. That night, they sneaked into the crypts of Winterfell. They stood before the statue of their father's father and made a promise in whispers. "We will not follow the same path. We will fight for each other. We will break the wheel before it crushes us." They didn't know it yet, but from that moment on, everything in Westeros was going to change. A few days after their secret vow in the crypts, the world around the Stark children began to shift like a shadow creeping across snow. Bran's dreams were becoming more vivid. He didn't just see the three-eyed crow now. He saw the faces of men he didn't know, battles that hadn't happened yet, and wolves standing in the snow with blood on their fur. He told Arya and Sansa everything. They believed him now. Arya, bold as ever, decided to push the limits. She followed Littlefinger one day, hiding behind walls and moving silently like a shadow. What she heard shook her. Littlefinger was whispering to someone in the stables about using Sansa against Ned, and about how the Queen had plans. already in motion. Arya didn't fully understand, but one thing was clear: danger was already in Winterfell, not just in King's Landing. She ran back to tell Sansa and Bran. Sansa's hands trembled. She had once dreamed of marrying Joffrey, but now she saw the Lannisters differently. They weren't just cruel, they were dangerous. That night, she confronted their father, Ned Stark. At first, Ned didn't take her seriously. "You've been reading too many stories, Sansa," he said gently. But she insisted. She told him about Cersei and Jaime's strange talks, about Arya's warning, about Bran's dreams. When Ned finally saw fear in all his children's eyes, he began to listen. Quietly, Ned started pulling away from the court. He began writing letters to old friends. He even considered sending Sansa and Arya back to Winterfell early. But the Lannisters were watching. Then Bran had a dream he couldn't shake. He saw their direwolves Grey Wind, Lady, Nymeria, all howling under a blood-red moon. He saw a crown of gold melting in fire, and a boy with no face stabbing a lion in the heart. He woke up gasping. At very morning, word came from King's Landing. Jon Arryn was dead, and the king still planned to ride to Winterfell. Bran begged his father not to accept the offer to be Hand of the King. He couldn't explain why, it was just a feeling. But this time, Ned listened. When Robert arrived, everything looked normal. Feasts were prepared, songs were sung, and children smiled. But beneath it all, the Stark family had changed. They were no longer soft-hearted northerners waiting for fate to crush them. Sansa avoided Joffrey's attention. Arya stayed close to the guards and watched every corner. Bran stayed out of sight and focused on his dreams, trying to understand them. They were preparing, but not for war, for survival. Cersei was suspicious. She noticed how quiet Sansa had become, how watchful Arya was. She had planned to slowly pull the Stark girls into her web of power, but something was wrong. She couldn't read them anymore. And then came the moment that changed it all. Joffrey, arrogant and cruel, attacked a butcher's boy on the road. But this time, Arya didn't run. She was there. She pulled out her small blade and stood between Joffrey and the boy. "He's done nothing," she shouted. Joffrey laughed, raising his sword. But before he could strike, Nymeria Arya's direwolf leapt from the trees and bit his arm, tearing his golden sleeve. Joffrey screamed. Blood spilled. Chaos broke out. But Arya didn't run. She stood tall, blade in hand, daring anyone to come closer. The king was furious. Cersei demanded justice. But Ned Stark didn't let them twist the story. This time, he stood strong. "You will not harm my daughters to protect your spoiled son," he said to Robert in front of the court. War was coming. The Lannisters knew the Starks were not playing along anymore. And for the first time in years, fear reached the eyes of Queen Cersei. In the shadows of Winterfell, Littlefinger changed his plans. He no longer saw weak children to manipulate, but dangerous minds rising from the north. The game had truly begun. And this time, the Starks weren't just pieces on the board. They were players. The wolves had tasted blood, and so had the children. After the incident with Joffrey, the royal party left Winterfell faster than expected. Queen Cersei's pride was bruised, and Joffrey's arm bore the mark of Nymeria's fangs for days. He cried like a child, but the real pain wasn't on his skin, it was in the humiliation. The Starks had stood up to him, and worse, no one dared punish them. Arya had become a name whispered in anger inside the Lannister tents. But back in Winterfell, the Stark children weren't celebrating. Bran's dreams had grown darker. He now saw shadows moving in the south shadows, with golden hair and bloody swords. He saw their father kneeling before a throne, not in honor, but in chains. He tried to write it down, to explain, but the words never matched what he felt. Sansa was no longer the sweet, wide-eyed girl dreaming of princes. She watched her mother and father more closely now. She even questioned her own desires. What if I had married Joffrey? she thought. Would I be wearing silk or chains? She began reading letters her mother received. She studied the names, the sigils, the politics. She listened to how alliances were made and how betrayals began. Arya teased her, calling her a baby raven, always pecking at secrets. But Sansa was changing. The lion had scared the bird, but now the bird was watching the lion from above. Arya, on the other hand, was done watching. She trained daily first with sticks, then real blades. Jon Snow had given her needle before he left, and she never let it out of her sight. She began sneaking out at night to hunt in the woods, to sharpen her instincts. She was becoming a wolf in the skin of a girl. One night, she caught two men whispering by the edge of the forest. They wore northern cloaks, but their voices were southern low-born, sneaky. They spoke of a raven that had arrived, of a message from the queen. "The hand of the king will travel alone," one said. "We'll make it look like an accident." Arya's heart raced. They were talking about her father. She followed them for an hour, then sprinted home like a shadow on fire. She told Bran and Sansa everything. The three gathered in the Godswood. Bran had drawn maps of the dreams he kept having paths that led south, but with dead ends and burning fields. One path was different. It led east, through the Vale. They made a decision that night. Their father would not go to King's Landing. If he did, he'd never return. But convincing Ned Stark wasn't easy. He was a man of duty, of honor, and Robert was his oldest friend. "If I refuse the hand's position, I may be seen as disloyal," he said. "We are already walking on thin ice with the Queen." Sansa, of all people, spoke the boldest. "What is loyalty worth if it kills you, father?" That silence in the room, it was louder than a scream. Catelyn, seeing her children united in fear, finally agreed. "Let me go instead," she said. "I'll go to the Vale. I'll speak to Lysa. Let her tell us what Jon Arryn discovered before he died. We need truths, not guesses." So they made a plan. Ned would delay the decision. Catelyn would travel east. The children would stay in Winterfell, but under heavy guard. They would pretend life was normal. But beneath the snow and stone, the wolves were awake. Meanwhile, in the south, Cersei received word that the north had grown silent. Too silent. Why haven't they responded? She hissed to Jaime. Ned Stark should be kneeling in front of Robert by now. Littlefinger entered the room with his usual smirk. "Because the Starks have grown smarter, my queen. And that is a problem." Cersei narrowed her eyes. "Then we must act before they grow too bold." Plans began to move in King's Landing. Gold was paid, swords were promised, ravens flew. But this time, the Starks weren't walking into a trap. They were building one. Snow fell heavier over Winterfell, but it wasn't just winter creeping in. It was war, silent and slow, wrapping its fingers around the north. Catelyn Stark had already left for the Vale, disguised as a merchant's wife. She traveled with 2 guards and a sealed letter hidden in her dress, addressed to her sister Lysa. The message was clear. Tell the truth. Tell us why Jon Arryn died. Back home, Arya couldn't rest. The face of one of the assassins she saw near the forest haunted her. So she drew it on a piece of parchment and gave it to one of the castle guards. Within a day, they had a name, Orlin Waters, a sellsword known to do dirty work for gold. Arya didn't wait for permission. She followed him again. This time, when he met with a hooded man near the old mill, she stayed close enough to hear. She said if Ned Stark doesn't ride south, his bloodline dies in the north. The hooded man muttered. "Start with the boy. Make it look like an accident. One slip off the wall, and it's done?" Arya's rage was fire in her chest. They were planning to kill Bran. She ran full speed, slipping through shadows like she had been born for it. She burst into Bran's room, breathless. He was staring at the fire, his eyes wide, seeing something far away. "They're coming for you," she said. "Tonight." Bran nodded slowly. "I know." "What?" "I saw it," he whispered. "A man with gloves, pushing me into the snow. But I didn't fall. You stopped him." Arya shivered. She didn't ask questions. She just grabbed her sword. That night, they laid a trap. Sansa, playing her part, told the kitchen girl she thought she saw a shadow moving near the eastern tower. The girl whispered it to the guards. Rumors spread like fire. But Arya waited in the shadows outside Bran's window. When the man came dressed in black, climbing silently, Arya didn't hesitate. She didn't scream. She didn't even give him a chance to speak. She leapt from the shadows and drove needles straight into his thigh. He howled, tried to swing at her, but Bran had already lit the signal fire they'd prepared, bright red flames from a bottle of wildfire hidden in a torch. Guards came running. The man was taken alive, bleeding and cursing. Ned Stark himself interrogated him. The truth came out in pieces. The man had been paid by someone in the royal party, a woman with golden hair. The Lannister's name was never spoken, but everyone in that room understood. And for the first time, Eddard Stark wavered. He stood at a crossroads between duty and vengeance, honor and survival. But when he looked at Arya bruised, bloody, fearless, and at Bran, shaking but alive, his heart turned. "No more silence," Ned said to his children. "No more waiting. We act now." He sent a raven to Robb, commanding him to prepare the bannermen quietly. "Only those we trust," the letter said. "Winter is coming, but it wears a golden crown." At the same time, word came from Catelyn. She had arrived in the Vale. Lysa was madder than ever, speaking of assassins in every shadow, refusing to help unless Catelyn swore loyalty to House Arryn above all others. But Catelyn didn't beg. She told Lysa, "If the Lannisters win, your son dies next. You may sit behind your high walls, but blood always finds a way in." Finally, Lysa cracked. She gave her sister a letter Jon Arryn had written just days before his death. In it, he revealed the truth Ned had long feared. The children of Cersei Lannister are not Roberts. They are born of incest. That secret was death. Catelyn knew the moment she touched that letter that it had the power to bring the realm to its knees. She sent another raven north. By the time it arrived in Winterfell, Ned had already begun choosing which lords he could trust. Arya trained daily, her blade sharp and her eyes sharper. Sansa had taken her mother's place, organizing messages, reading reports, keeping watch on every movement inside the castle. And Bran had stopped walking through Winterfell. Now he flew, through dreams, through animals, through ravens. He saw everything, and the Lannisters didn't know it yet, but the North was no longer blind. It was watching, it was waiting, and it would not forgive. The North was colder now, not from winter, but from the silence before a storm. After the failed assassination attempt, Winterfell turned into a fortress. Guards doubled. Doors were locked at sunset. Ravens flew with urgency. And in the heart of it all, the Stark children had become something more than just children. They were eyes, ears, and claws of a family that had been marked for death. Bran, no longer dreaming aimlessly, now had control. He could slip into the minds of crows and wolves, see from above, and feel through fur. He told Arya of men gathering near the western road, men with no banners, mercenaries, killers, sent north not to deliver messages, but to silence voices. Arya didn't wait. She took 2 guards she trusted and ambushed them near the woods. 3 men with gold coins hidden in their boots. One confessed before his throat was cut. "We were paid by the Queen's cousin," he muttered. "Kill the wolf cubs before they howl too loud." Arya kept that coin. Meanwhile, Sansa had grown cold in her own way. She no longer cried when reading her mother's letters. She no longer blushed when guards looked at her. Her mind worked like a chessboard now, every name a piece to be moved. She began helping Mr. Lewin with his records, pretending to be just a curious girl. But what she was really doing was collecting names. Names of lords loyal to the crown, names of spies who sent strange ravens, names of servants who spoke too quietly. When she found one servant hiding a sealed letter from King's Landing, she took it herself. Inside was a message meant for someone named Sir Garland, saying, "Proceed with the plan. Poison in the wine at the next feast. The girl with the red hair must be first." Sansa's hands shook. They wanted her dead. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She burned the letter and prepared the next feast herself served, only with food her own hands had checked. She said nothing to the others, but that night she took Arya aside and whispered, "No more dresses. No more lies. We wear blades now." In the great hall, Lord Ned Stark looked at his daughters. One carried a blade in her boot, the other a plan in her eyes. And his crippled son, Bran, sat quietly, but his mind was farther and wider than any raven's wings. Ned knew it then his children had passed into shadow, and the crown had made them that way. The raven from Catelyn finally arrived. Ned read it in silence. The truth about Cersei's children sat like a weight in his chest. He read it 3 times, then looked at the fire and whispered, "The war is already here." He knew what it meant. If Robert knew, he would kill Cersei. Jaime would kill Ned. The realm would burn either way. But if he stayed silent, if he let that lie continue, his family would die. So he made his choice. He sent 2 riders south, one to Stannis Baratheon, with proof of the queen's incest. The other to Sir Barristan Selmy, a man Ned believed still had honor, to warn him, "Protect the king. The queen will move soon." But he also knew the message may never reach them. The Lannisters had spies in every shadow. So Ned made preparations for the worst. He told Maester Luwin to seal the castle's records, send false messages to confuse the spies, and if the ravens stopped coming from the south, prepare Winterfell for siege. That night, Bran slipped into the mind of a raven and flew farther than ever before. He crossed forests and rivers, mountains and valleys, until he reached the capital. And what he saw chilled him. Queen Cersei, dressed in mourning black, stood before a bed King Robert lay dying, poisoned from a wound during a hunting trip. Joffrey was already wearing a golden cloak. And in the corner, Littlefinger whispered to the queen, "Ned Stark has made his move. We must strike now." Bran flew back, waking up gasping. "They've killed the king," he whispered. "Joffrey sits the throne. Mother's walking into a trap." The next day, Ned summoned Robb from the south, calling the bannermen to ride. War was no longer coming. It had begun. And this time, the Starks would not walk blindly into the lion's den. They would bring the wolves. The flames in Winterfell's great hearth burned longer now, not for warmth, but for war. Robb Stark had returned from the south, riding harder than ever before. He was no longer the boy his siblings remembered. His jaw was sharper, voice deeper, and in his eyes was the quiet understanding that childhood had died. Ned embraced him tightly, but there was no time for soft words. The raven Bran had seen was true King Robert was dead, and the Lannisters had crowned Joffrey. The crown wasn't just gold now, it was blood-soaked. "The capital will bleed," Ned said to Robb, "and we won't be safe from it. Not here, not anymore." The north was being watched. Bran had seen more riders in the woods. Arya had caught a man trying to bribe one of the guards. And Sansa had intercepted another letter, this one from Varys, the spider himself, asking if House Stark would accept peace if the girl was wed to the boy king. When Ned read that letter, his face turned to stone. They were still trying to claim Sansa, still thinking she was the soft Stark girl who dreamed of royal kisses and silk bedsheets. She burned that letter herself. "Tell them," she said, looking her father in the eye, "I will never kneel for a golden snake." Arya smirked. "That's my sister." But the threats were growing. Catelyn had sent another raven. She had escaped the Vale barely. Lysa had turned paranoid, refused to send troops and accused her own sister of betrayal. But Catelyn had left with more than words. She had found one man, Sir Roderick Castle loyal and brave, who had followed her south. Together, they were heading to River Run, hoping her brother Edmure would rise with the Tully banners. They needed allies. Because the Lannisters had already begun marching, Jaime Lannister led thousands across the Riverlands, burning and looting. Lord Tywin was gathering an even larger host, and Cersei, now Queen Regent, had begun arresting all who questioned Joffrey's birth. Ned's letter had never reached Stannis. The messenger had been found days later, throat slit, tongue cut out. So the Starks had only one option left. To survive, they had to strike first. In the dark of the Godswood, Robb, Arya, Sansa, Bran, and their father gathered one last time before Robb's ride. "We are not just marching to protect our name," Ned told them. "We are marching because the truth has become a crime. Because honor is weakness in the eyes of wolves dressed in lion's fur." Robb nodded. "Then we'll show them what real wolves do." Arya wanted to go with him. She begged, she cried, but Ned refused. "Your war is here," he told her. "This castle, your sister, your brother, they will need teeth sharper than swords." So Arya stayed, bitter but burning inside. That night, Sansa handed her a map she had drawn herself, based on information from the servants, secret tunnels, supply routes, guard schedules. Arya stared at her. "When did you learn this?" "When I stopped pretending the world was kind," Sansa whispered. Bran, meanwhile, had seen more visions. He saw fire in the south, a red woman in shadows, a boy with silver hair standing in the storm, and 3 dragons flying over ashes. He didn't understand it all, but one thing was clear. The war wasn't just against Lannisters. It was against fate itself. As Robb rode south with bannermen behind him, Arya trained harder. She now practiced with Sir Roderick's best men, beating boys twice her size. Sansa poisoned her voice, made it soft and sweet when she needed to listen unnoticed, and sharp when she gave silent orders to the maids and guards she trusted. Even Rickon, the youngest, began to sense the change. His wolf, Shaggy Dog, grew wilder, more restless, and no one dared come near him now. The Stark children weren't waiting to be hunted. They were sharpening claws in the snow. Back in King's Landing, Cersei watched the flames dance in the fireplace, unaware of just how wrong everything was going. "Ned Stark is quiet," she said to Littlefinger. "Too quiet." "I expected begging." Littlefinger smiled faintly. "You expected a dog, my queen, but it seems you've woken wolves instead." Her smile faded. Because even though the capital glittered, even though her boy wore a crown, and even though her enemies were far away, the North remembered. And this time, it wasn't coming to kneel. It was coming to collect. Smoke rose from the Riverlands. The war had come, and it carried the banners of House Stark, flapping like thunder in the wind. Robb Stark had become more than just the young wolf. He was a name whispered across the South with both fear and fury. In his first battle, he had ambushed a Lannister scouting party near the Whispering Wood. When they tried to mock him for being a boy leading men, Robb had shown them what boys born of winter could become. He left none alive. But even as the southern front burned, something darker began creeping into Winterfell. Bran's dreams had grown colder. He saw wolves dying in fire, dragons screaming in chains, and a shadow with a crown of thorns swallowing the sun. He saw Sansa, standing in snow, her face pale, her eyes empty. He saw Arya bleeding beneath a moonless sky, surrounded by faceless figures. He woke every night drenched in sweat, whispering one word again and again: chaos. And chaos was already taking root inside the castle walls. Ravens stopped arriving. The Maester found one dead, with its wings snapped and its eyes carved out. "A message," he said quietly. "A warning." Then 2 guards were found, poisoned guards who had sworn to Arya and Sansa. There were no signs of struggle, just empty cups and open eyes. Someone had gotten inside. Someone had already begun hunting the wolves from within. Sansa reacted first. She began interrogating servants. Quietly, smartly. A word here, a whisper there. She didn't scream or accuse. She asked soft questions that felt like kindness, and when someone lied, she remembered. Arya, on the other hand, hunted the halls like a ghost. She found a blade hidden under a merchant's cart. Then she found a coin Valyrian in design, the kind she'd seen in that strange book long ago. A coin meant for faceless men. Someone had come for them. Not a soldier. An assassin. One who could wear any face. Anyone could be them, Arya whispered to Sansa one night. Even someone we trust. So they created a new rule between them. No one walks alone. Not even for water. Not for food. The assassin had no power if he couldn't get one of them alone. Still, the fear crept deeper. Arya's hand never left Needle. Sansa stopped sleeping in her room. Even Rickon was kept under guard at all times. Bran stayed in his chamber, eyes distant, reaching through ravens and walls, trying to see where the next shadow would strike. And it happened. A servant named Murray, who had worked in the kitchens for years, suddenly disappeared. When they found her again, she was hanging from the rafters of the great hall, eyes gouged, tongue missing. Bran touched her cold hand and shuddered. He saw what she saw. A man, face blurred, voice wrong, handing her a drink. He saw the coin again, the same symbol, the same promise. Kill a Stark and earn your new face. The assassin was here, already inside. The girls made a bold choice. They brought in Theon Greyjoy. They didn't trust him fully, but he had something others didn't. Pride. Theon wanted to prove himself, and he knew every dark corner of Winterfell. If someone was hiding, he could find them. But even Theon seemed uneasy. Whoever this is, he told Arya, they move like mist. They don't leave tracks. It's like chasing death itself. Arya stared at him. Then we'll trap death. Make it bleed. They staged a trap. A fake letter from Ned Stark, claiming a secret exit under the crypts would be used to send messages south. They left it where the wrong person could find it. That night, they waited. Sansa held a dagger beneath her gown. Arya stayed in the shadows, blade in hand. Bran sat beside a candle, pretending to sleep. And then, a whisper of movement. A figure appeared, hooded, slow, careful. He moved toward Bran, silent as falling snow. And just as he raised a dagger, Arya leapt. Needle flashed. Steel sang. But the figure didn't scream. He turned, face shifting, mouth widening like his skin wasn't even real. They fought hard. Arya struck, but he moved like wind. Sansa threw the candle, flames leaping between them. Bran screamed, not in fear, but in command. Summer the direwolf rushed from the shadows and tore into the assassin's side. The figure twisted, dropped smoke, vanished into the dark. He was wounded, but not gone. He'll come again, Sansa whispered. Arya nodded, breathless. Next time, we kill him. And as they stood there in the half-burnt crypt hallway, blood on the stone, one truth settled deep in their bones. The war was not just swords and banners anymore. It was shadows. And the wolves had to become monsters to survive them.